The flashbulbs popped incessantly as Richard Hawthorne, CEO of Vanguard Technologies, took the stage at the Waldorf Astoria Ballroom. With a net worth of $8.2 billion, Hawthorne's announcements could move markets. Today's press conference was set to reveal the company's revolutionary quantum computing breakthrough, a project he had personally overseen for 5 years. Tall, with salt and pepper hair perfectly styled, Richard adjusted his bespoke Tom Ford suit and approached the podium with practiced confidence. At 52, he had mastered the art of commanding a room. Behind him, a massive screen displayed the company's latest financial projections, all pointing upward. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice resonating through the packed ballroom. "Today marks a milestone not just for Vanguard Technologies, but for humanity's technological journey. The reporters leaned forward, digital recorders extended. Wall Street analysts furiously typed notes. Richard had rehearsed this speech dozens of times, calibrating each word for maximum impact on stock prices. "Our quantum processing unit has achieved computational speeds previously thought impossible," he continued, gesturing to the technical specifications appearing on the screen. "This breakthrough will revolutionize everything from medical research to..." A commotion erupted at the back of the ballroom. Security personnel moved quickly toward the disturbance, but not before a small figure broke through the crowd. A girl, no more than 8 years old, with blonde pigtails and a determined expression. "Mr. Hawthorne," she called out, her high voice cutting through the murmurs of the startled audience. Richard paused mid-sentence, momentarily thrown off his script. The girl evaded a security guard's grasp and darted down the central aisle toward the stage. "Sir, I'm sorry," a flustered event coordinator whispered into his earpiece. "Security is handling it." The girl reached the edge of the stage before a guard gently caught her arm, but not before she locked eyes with Richard and shouted words that would shatter his carefully constructed world. "You're my daddy. Mommy said I'm your biggest investment ever." The ballroom fell into stunned silence. Camera flashes intensified. Richard felt the blood drain from his face as he stared at the child. Something in her eyes, a familiar determination, the curve of her chin, sent a jolt of recognition through him. "Emily Roberts," she announced proudly. "I'm 8 3/4. My mommy is Katherine Roberts. She said it was time you knew about me." Katherine Roberts. The name hit Richard like a physical blow. 11 years ago, the research fellowship program, the brilliant young scientist he'd mentored, then loved, then left when the board had pressured him about inappropriate workplace relationships. The timing matched perfectly. The security guard was gently escorting the girl away as reporters erupted with questions. Richard's PR director rushed to his side, already damage controlling, but Richard couldn't hear anything beyond the roaring in his ears. His perfectly ordered life, his reputation, the company's stock price, all was suddenly in free fall. "My name is Theo Teller, and if this introduction has already sparked your curiosity, leave your like to follow the unfolding of this extraordinary journey. If you've ever had your life turned upside down in an instant, subscribe to the channel now and share in the comments what was the most unexpected news you've ever received, much like our protagonist is experiencing right now. Also, tell me which city you're watching this story from. Each message and subscription gives me strength to bring more stories that will stir your emotions. Richard gripped the podium, his knuckles white. For a man who controlled every variable, who calculated every risk, who had built an empire on predictive algorithms, this was the one outcome he had never computed. As the chaos unfolded around him, a single thought crystallized in his mind. Everything was about to change. 6 hours after the disastrous press conference, Richard Hawthorne sat alone in his Manhattan penthouse, 3 fingers of 18-year-old Macallan in a crystal tumbler, staring at the cityscape through floor-to-ceiling windows. His phone had been ringing non-stop until he'd ordered his assistant to block all calls. The company's PR team had released a terse statement claiming the incident was being investigated and refusing further comment. Richard took another sip of scotch, feeling the burn track down his throat. The stock had dropped 11% before trading closed, nearly $1 billion in market capitalization gone in hours. But it wasn't the money troubling him most. It was the girl's eyes, Emily's eyes, his eyes. "What did you expect, Katherine?" he muttered to the empty room. "To blindside me like this after 9 years of silence?" He pulled out his tablet and searched. Katherine Roberts, scientist. Her professional profile appeared immediately. Associate Professor of Biochemistry at Columbia University, numerous publications, respected in her field. The professional headshot showed a woman more mature than he remembered, but with the same intelligent gaze and subtle smile that had once captivated him. Richard's mind traveled back to 2014, when Katherine had been the most promising fellow in Vanguard's Research Accelerator program. Their relationship had been intense but brief, barely 3 months before the board got wind of it. The ultimatum had been clear: end it or face a vote of no confidence. He'd chosen his company, of course. Always the company. Katherine had left with dignity. No scenes, no demands. She'd simply said, "You're making a choice that will define you, Richard," and walked away. He'd arranged a generous severance package, excellent recommendations, and had his people ensure she landed well at Columbia. Then he'd filed the episode away as a regrettable but necessary business decision. Had she been pregnant when she left? The timing aligned perfectly with the girl's age. A soft ping from his secure personal email interrupted his thoughts. The subject line froze him. "Regarding Emily." Richard opened it with unsteady hands. "Richard," it read, "I never intended for Emily to learn about you this way. She found an old photo and started asking questions. I've always been honest with her, perhaps too honest. She's headstrong and resourceful, traits I imagine she inherited from you. I understand. You must be shocked and angry. I owe you an explanation, not for the press or your board, but for you and Emily. We're staying at the Peninsula if you want to talk. Room 1542. Katherine." Richard stared at the message for a long time. The Peninsula was just 15 blocks away. His phone rang. It was Jacob Stein, chairman of the board. "I've been dodging his calls all day," Richard muttered but answered. "Richard," Jacob's voice was tightly controlled. "The board is convening an emergency session tomorrow at 9 a.m. "Jacob, is it true?" the chairman interrupted. Richard hesitated, then admitted, "I don't know yet. It's possible." A heavy silence filled the line. "You need definitive answers before that meeting, Richard, and a strategy. The press is running wild with this. CNBC is speculating about succession planning." "I've been CEO for 17 years, Richard snapped. "I've increased shareholder value by 3,000%. "And we're grateful," Jacob said, his tone softening slightly. "But you know how this works. The company comes first. Always." After ending the call, Richard stood and walked to his bedroom. He changed from his suit into dark jeans and a cashmere sweater, then instructed his driver to bring the car around. 20 minutes later, he stood in the hallway of the Peninsula's 15th floor, staring at the door of room 1542. For a man who made multi-billion-dollar decisions daily, he found himself paralyzed by the prospect of knocking on this door. From inside came the sound of a child's laughter, bright, uninhibited, followed by Katherine's voice, softer but recognizable even after all these years. Richard raised his hand and knocked 3 times, decisive and firm, the way he'd trained himself to do everything. The laughter inside stopped. Footsteps approached. Richard Hawthorne, the man who calculated every risk and planned for every contingency, found himself completely unprepared for what would happen next. The door opened, and Katherine Roberts stood before him. Time had been kind to her. Her chestnut hair was shorter now, styled in a professional bob, and fine lines at the corners of her eyes spoke of both laughter and concentration. She wore simple jeans and a blue cashmere sweater that brought out the depth of her eyes, those same intelligent, unflinching eyes that had once seen through his carefully constructed facade. "Richard," she said quietly, neither surprised nor particularly welcoming, "I thought you might come. Before he could respond, a small blonde head peeked around Katherine's legs. Emily looked up at him with undisguised curiosity. Her nose scrunched slightly in concentration, exactly the expression he saw in the mirror when tackling complex problems. "You're taller in person," the girl declared matter-of-factly. Despite himself, Richard almost smiled. "Most adults are taller than children." Emily shook her head. "No, I mean taller than on TV. TV makes people look shorter. It's a perspective illusion," she pronounced perspective with careful precision. Katherine placed a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder. Why don't you finish your homework at the desk while I talk with Mr. Hawthorne?" "It's already finished," Emily replied, but after a pointed look from her mother, she sighed dramatically. "Fine, but I have questions for him later." "I'm sure you do," Katherine murmured, as Emily retreated to the suite's desk area. Katherine stepped aside, gesturing Richard into the suite. He entered, hyper-aware of crossing a threshold that would irrevocably change his life. The luxury suite was modest by his standards, but comfortable, a sitting area with a sofa and armchairs, a small dining table, and a doorway leading presumably to a bedroom. Emily had colonized the desk with books, colored pencils, and what appeared to be a science workbook well beyond third-grade level. "Would you like something to drink?" Katherine asked with the practiced politeness of strangers. "No," Richard replied, then reconsidered. "Actually, yes, water would be fine." As Katherine moved to the minibar, Richard spoke quietly. "You should have told me." She handed him a bottle of Evian, her movements deliberate. "Should I have? When exactly? When the board forced you to choose between me and your precious company? Or perhaps when you ensured I'd be comfortably settled elsewhere with that generous severance package and glowing recommendations? If I had known." "You would have what, Richard?" Katherine's voice remained low, mindful of Emily across the room. "Set up a trust fund, arranged visitation through your attorneys, made her another appointment in your calendar?" Richard felt a flash of anger. "That's unfair. You made this decision unilaterally." "I made a decision to protect my child from being an inconvenient footnote in the biography of Richard Hawthorne." Katherine's composure never wavered, which somehow made her words sting more. "Emily deserved better than to be a problem for your PR team to manage." Richard glanced toward the desk where Emily sat, studiously pretending not to listen, while obviously catching every word. His anger deflated slightly. "She looks like my mother," he said softly. Something in Katherine's expression softened. "I know. I've seen the photos in your Vanity Fair profile." "Why now, Katherine? After 9 years of silence?" Katherine sighed, gesturing toward the balcony. They stepped outside, where the evening breeze carried the sounds of Manhattan 15 floors below. "I never intended to keep her from you forever," Katherine said, looking out at the cityscape. "I always planned to tell her about you when she was old enough to understand. But Emily's exceptional. Like you, she doesn't process information like other children. Once she started asking questions, half-truths wouldn't satisfy her. So you told an 8-year-old to crash a globally live-streamed press conference." Richard couldn't keep the edge from his voice. "Of course not." Katherine turned to face him, genuinely angry for the first time. "I told her who you were last week. I explained that we would approach you privately, through proper channels. I had already drafted an email to your private account." She ran a hand through her hair in frustration. "But she's your daughter, Richard. She decided your shareholders had waited long enough for the important news." Despite everything, Richard felt an unexpected surge of pride. The girl had guts and initiative, traits that had built his empire. "The board is meeting tomorrow," he said finally. "They're concerned about the optics." Katherine laughed without humor. "Still making decisions based on what's best for Vanguard. The company employs 43,000 people," Richard countered. "My responsibilities extend beyond—" "Dad," Emily's voice interrupted from the doorway. She was holding a tablet. "They're talking about us on Bloomberg." "Dad." The word hit Richard like a physical force. He had been called many things: genius, tyrant, visionary, ruthless. But never that. As he turned to look at his daughter, the words still strange in his mind, Richard Hawthorne realized he was facing a challenge no algorithm could solve and no business strategy could navigate. For the first time in decades, he would have to lead with something other than cold calculation. The Bloomberg reporter's voice filled the hotel suite as Emily held up her tablet. Shocking revelation at today's Vanguard Technologies press conference as Wall Street questioning the future of CEO Richard Hawthorne. The tech billionaire's carefully crafted image was shattered when an unidentified child claimed to be his daughter. Vanguard's stock dropped 11% before closing, erasing nearly $1 billion in market value. Sources close to the board indicate an emergency meeting has been called for tomorrow morning. Richard gently took the tablet from Emily's hands and muted the broadcast. "Perhaps we should discuss this as adults first," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. Emily looked up at him, clearly disappointed. "But I'm part of this too." "You certainly are," Katherine interjected, guiding her daughter back inside. "Which is why Mr. Hawthorne and I need to figure out what happens next." "Richard," he corrected automatically, looking at Emily. "You can call me Richard." Emily considered this, then shook her head. "That doesn't seem right. You're either Mr. Hawthorne or Dad. Those are the logical options." Richard blinked, unused to being challenged so directly. Katherine hid a small smile. "I have school tomorrow," Emily continued pragmatically. "Are you coming to Career Day next Friday? I already told Ms. Winters that my dad runs a quantum computing company. She didn't believe me." The simplicity of the question amid such complexity left Richard momentarily speechless. Career Day, school presentations, parent-teacher conferences, a world entirely foreign to him. "Emily," Katherine said gently, "this is all very new. We need to give Richard some time to adjust." "Adults always need time," Emily sighed with the profound exasperation only children can summon. "But quantum entanglement doesn't wait for people to adjust. Neither does the news cycle." Richard couldn't help it. He laughed. A genuine laugh, something his executive team would have found more shocking than the day's revelations. Emily beamed at him, clearly pleased with her effect. For a moment, Richard glimpsed what might have been years of moments like this, watching this remarkable mind develop. His phone vibrated. Jacob Stein again. Richard silenced it. "You're right about the news cycle," he told Emily. "And about quantum entanglement for that matter." "I know," she said simply. "Mom's been teaching me physics." Richard looked at Katherine with newfound respect. "Biochemistry and physics," she shrugged. "She asks questions. I find answers." The simple statement held volumes of meaning. 9 years of single parenting, of nurturing a brilliant child, of building a life that had never included him. "I need to make some calls," Richard said, decision crystallizing. "But first, I want to know more about Emily, about both of you." For the next hour, they talked. Emily showed him her science projects, her collection of rock samples, her coding attempts. Katherine filled in details of their lives, their apartment near Columbia, Emily's accelerated education program, their Sunday traditions of museum visits, followed by hot chocolate at Serendipity. Richard listened more attentively than he had in any board meeting. He learned that Emily had his allergies to strawberries, Katherine's love of classical music, and a stubborn streak that was clearly a contribution from both genetic donors. She was extraordinary, not just in intelligence, but in her unfettered enthusiasm, her clarity of expression, her absolute certainty in her place in the world. As the evening progressed, Richard made his decision. When Emily finally went to bed in the suite's second bedroom, he turned to Katherine. "I want to be part of her life," he said simply. Katherine studied him, searching for sincerity. "As what, Richard? A weekend father when your schedule permits? A distant benefactor? The man who sends expensive birthday gifts but can't make the party?" "I don't know yet," he admitted, the honesty feeling strange but necessary. "I've never been a father, but I want to learn." "And what about tomorrow's board meeting?" What happens when they tell you to make this go away quietly for the good of the company? Richard stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city he had helped shape. For decades, his identity had been inseparable from Vanguard Technologies. Now, for the first time, he wondered if there might be more to Richard Hawthorne than the CEO. Some investments, he said finally, are worth more than stock prices. And Daesh, if you believe in second chances and the possibility of transformation, even for those who seem to have everything figured out, consider subscribing to our channel. Like Emily reminded us today, sometimes the most valuable discoveries come when we least expect them, forcing us to recalculate our understanding of what truly matters in life. Morning arrived with the relentless pace of consequences. Richard had returned to his penthouse at midnight after promising Emily he would call her after his board meeting. He'd spent the night preparing, not for the company's defense, but for his own. At 8:45 a.m., Richard Hawthorne strode into Vanguard's headquarters, the gleaming 58-story tower on Madison Avenue that bore his company's name. Employees stared as he passed, their whispers following in his wake. His executive assistant, Marianne, who had efficiently managed his life for 15 years, greeted him with uncharacteristic hesitation. "The board is assembled in the main conference room," she said. "Your legal team is waiting in your office. The PR department has prepared 3 different statements, depending on the direction you choose to take." Richard nodded, then surprised her by asking, "Marianne, do you have children?" She blinked, startled by the personal question from a man who had never once inquired about her life outside the office. "Yes, 2 boys, 12 and 14. Are they worth it? The complications they bring to your life?" Marianne's professional veneer softened. "They're not complications, Mr. Hawthorne. They're the reason for everything else." Richard considered this, then nodded again. "Cancel my legal team. I won't be needing them this morning." Before she could respond, he continued toward the boardroom, each step more determined than the last. The conversation inside fell silent as he entered. 12 people sat around the massive table of sustainably harvested walnut, the Vanguard board of directors, including Jacob Stein at the head of the table. All wore expressions ranging from concern to outright disapproval. "Richard," Jacob began, his tone carefully measured, "we've been discussing yesterday's incident. The potential implications for shareholder value, public perception, and corporate governance are significant." "I'm sure they are," Richard replied, remaining standing rather than taking his usual seat. "Before we begin, I'd like to make something clear. Emily Roberts is my daughter." Murmurs rippled around the table. Vanessa Chen, the newest board member, leaned forward. "You've confirmed this." "I don't need a DNA test to recognize my own eyes looking back at me," Richard said. "But yes, the timing aligns perfectly. Katherine Roberts and I had a relationship 11 years ago during her fellowship at Vanguard's Research Accelerator. The same Katherine Roberts, who's now making waves in biomolecular computing?" asked Terence Washington, their chief scientific advisor. "Her work on protein folding algorithms is groundbreaking." Richard nodded. "The same. She's raised our daughter alone for 9 years, while establishing herself as a leader in her field." Jacob cleared his throat. "Richard, while this is certainly complicated, we need to focus on damage control. Our stock is down nearly 12%. The quarterly projections..." "We'll be fine," Richard interrupted. "The quantum computing breakthrough we announced yesterday, before the interruption, represents a technological leap that will secure Vanguard's market dominance for a decade. The fundamentals haven't changed, but public perception has," countered Miranda Jeffries, head of the governance committee. "This revelation raises questions about judgment, transparency, hidden liabilities." "My daughter is not a liability," Richard said, his voice suddenly hard. The room fell silent at his tone, one they'd heard before, but never directed at the board itself. "Of course not," Jacob backpedaled. "But the situation requires careful management. We've drafted a statement acknowledging the possibility while emphasizing privacy and focusing attention back on our technological achievements. Meanwhile, our legal team recommends a confidential arrangement with Ms. Roberts that includes—" "No," Richard said simply. Jacob stopped mid-sentence. "I'm sorry?" "No arrangements, no confidentiality agreements, no burying the story." Richard straightened to his full height. "I'm going to publicly acknowledge Emily as my daughter and begin establishing a relationship with her." The board erupted in objections. Richard let them continue for a moment before raising his hand. The room quieted, a testament to his authority even now. "For 17 years," he said, "I've made every decision based on what's best for this company. I've sacrificed personal relationships, health, and balance in service to Vanguard's growth. I've given you 17-hour days, canceled vacations, missed holidays, all to build what we have now." He paused, looking at each board member in turn. "Yesterday I met my daughter for the first time. She's brilliant, curious, and fearless. She has Katherine's determination and my analytical mind, and for 9 years I knew nothing about her existence." Richard walked slowly around the table as he continued. "I won't miss another day. So here are your options. You can accept that your CEO is going to publicly acknowledge his daughter and establish a normal parental relationship with her, or you can begin the search for new leadership." "Richard," Jacob said, his voice gentle but firm, "no one is suggesting you shouldn't have a relationship with your child. We're simply concerned about how this is handled publicly." "Then, let me be clear about how it will be handled," Richard replied. "I'm holding a press conference this afternoon. I'll announce that Emily Roberts is my daughter, that I've just learned of her existence, and that I look forward to being part of her life. I'll also reiterate yesterday's technological announcement and assure investors that Vanguard remains the industry leader in quantum computing. Then I'll be taking a 2-week leave of absence, my first in 17 years, to begin getting to know my daughter." The silence that followed was profound. It was Miranda who finally spoke. "And if the board objects," Richard shrugged, "then I tender my resignation, effective immediately, sell my controlling interest in Vanguard to the highest bidder, and still hold that press conference, just with slightly different wording." The threat was clear. Richard Hawthorne owned 26% of Vanguard's stock. If he sold to a competitor, the company could face a hostile takeover. Jacob exchanged glances with the other board members. "May we have the room to discuss this privately?" Richard nodded and exited to his private office, where he stared out at the Manhattan skyline. For the first time in his career, he had given the board an ultimatum, rather than skillfully maneuvering them toward his preferred outcome. The sensation was both terrifying and exhilarating. His phone chimed with a text from Katherine. "Emily wants to know if you're still coming for dinner tonight. Apparently, she's planning to quiz you on quantum mechanics." Richard smiled at the screen, feeling a strange lightness despite the professional uncertainty. Whatever happened in that boardroom, something fundamental had shifted in his universe. For once, the legendary Richard Hawthorne was making a decision not calculated for maximum business advantage, but for something far more valuable and infinitely more complex. The press conference had gone surprisingly well. Standing before a forest of microphones and cameras, Richard had made his announcement with the same confident precision he used for product launches. The initial questions had been predictably intrusive. How could he not have known? Was he planning to seek custody? What did this mean for Vanguard's leadership? But Richard had navigated them with newfound clarity. "I'm here today as both a CEO and a father," he had told the assembled press. I've just discovered I have a remarkable daughter, and while I regret the years I've missed, I'm committed to being present for her future. As for Vanguard, our breakthrough in quantum computing remains the most significant technological advancement this decade. I trust shareholders will focus on the company's fundamentals rather than my personal life. The board had ultimately backed him, though not without extracting concessions. He would maintain daily contact during his leave. Major decisions would require his input, and he would personally reassure key investors. Still, it was a victory Richard hadn't been entirely certain of winning. Now, 3 days later, he sat in Katherine's modest faculty apartment near Columbia University, watching Emily methodically construct a model of a quantum processor using building blocks, pipe cleaners, and ping-pong balls. The concentrated furrow of her brow as she worked was so familiar it was unsettling, like watching footage of himself as a child. "That's not exactly how it works," he said gently, pointing to her representation of quantum entanglement. "I know," Emily replied without looking up. "This is just the visualization. The actual process is much more complex and involves superposition states that can't be physically modeled with household objects." She adjusted a pipe cleaner. "I'm making it accessible for visualization purposes." Richard exchanged a glance with Katherine, who was grading papers at the dining table. She gave him a small smile that said, "Yes, she's always like this." "When can I see your lab?" Emily asked, still focused on her model. "Mum says your quantum computers are kept at super cold temperatures, like almost absolute zero." "That's right. We use liquid helium cooling systems to reduce atomic vibration and maintain quantum coherence," Emily nodded. "I read about it." Richard felt that same unexpected surge of pride. "I could arrange a tour next week, if your mother approves. It would have to be after school hours." Emily looked up at last, eyes brightening. "Really? Could I bring my notebook? I have questions about your error correction protocols." "Error correction protocols?" Richard repeated, bemused. "How much research have you done exactly?" Katherine interjected from the table. "Everything she could find online about Vanguard Technologies for the past week. Plus, she made me check out 3 books on quantum computing from the university library. And Mum's research papers on biomolecular computing," Emily added. "I think there might be applications for your quantum systems." Richard raised an eyebrow at Katherine. "You're working on quantum biological interfaces?" She shrugged, but couldn't hide a flash of professional pride. "Early stages. Protein folding calculations are a natural application for quantum computing, but the interface challenges are significant." "We should discuss this further," Richard said, professional interest piqued. "Vanguard has been looking at biological applications, but we lack expertise in protein modeling." "Perhaps another time," Katherine said pointedly with a glance at Emily. The message was clear. This time was for their daughter, not business. Richard nodded, accepting the gentle correction. It was a new experience for him, having his focus redirected, operating without an agenda or desired outcome. For 3 days, he'd been attempting to simply be present, to learn about Emily without strategic purpose. The effort was both exhausting and oddly liberating. His phone vibrated with a message from Jacob Stein. "Deutsche Bank investors requesting call re-quantum announcement. Concerns about timeline." Richard silenced the phone without responding. Another new behavior that would have been unthinkable a week ago. "Are you staying for dinner?" Emily asked, adding the final touches to her model. "If that's all right," Richard replied, looking to Katherine for confirmation. She hesitated, then nodded. "I was just going to make pasta." "I could cook," Richard offered. At their surprised expressions, he added, "I do know how. I just rarely have the time." "What can you make?" Emily asked skeptically. "I make an excellent risotto," he said. "It was my mother's recipe." "Your mother," Emily said thoughtfully. "That would be my grandmother." The simple statement hit Richard with unexpected force. His mother had died 5 years ago, never knowing she had a granddaughter. "Yes," he said softly. "She would have adored you." Katherine must have noticed the shift in his expression. She stood, gathering her papers. "Why don't you two make dinner together? Emily can be your sous chefs." "What's a sous chefs?" Emily asked. "It's the second in command in a kitchen," Richard explained. "But I thought you might prefer to be co-chefs. Equal partnership." Emily considered this, then nodded approvingly. Equitable division of labor is important in any collaborative endeavor. As they moved to the kitchen, Richard noticed a pattern emerging in his interactions with Emily. Each conversation revealed new facets of her personality, little glimpses of Katherine's influence and his own genetics remixed into something entirely unique. He found himself cataloging these discoveries, treasuring them in a way he'd never valued information before. They were midway through preparation, with Richard showing Emily how to properly dice an onion, when his phone rang again. This time, it was Marianne, his assistant, which meant it was likely urgent. "I should take this," he said apologetically. Katherine, who had been watching from the living room sofa, gave him a look he couldn't quite interpret. Not exactly disapproval, but something more complex. Richard answered, moving toward the apartment's entry hall for privacy. "Mr. Hawthorne," Marianne's voice was tense, "I'm sorry to disturb you, but there's been a development. Carlton Hayes from the Wall Street Journal is working on a story. He somehow obtained emails from 11 years ago, internal board communications, about your relationship with Katherine Roberts." Richard felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. "What kind of communications?" "Messages between board members discussing how to handle the situation, including some that suggest they implemented an active strategy to separate you from Ms. Roberts, for the good of the company." Richard's grip tightened on the phone. He knew exactly what those emails would contain: discussions of Katherine as a distraction and potential liability, assessments of how to remove her from the company while minimizing legal exposure, calculations of the cost-benefit ratio of various severance packages, correspondence that reduced a brilliant woman and their relationship to a corporate problem requiring efficient resolution. "How did Hayes get these?" "Unknown, sir. He's requesting comment by tomorrow morning. The story runs in the weekend edition." From the kitchen, Emily called out, "Dad, I think the onions are ready." Richard looked back at his daughter, then at Katherine, who was watching him with that same unreadable expression. "Sir," Marianne prompted, "how do you want to handle this?" For 17 years, Richard Hawthorne had expertly managed every crisis, controlled every narrative, calculated every response for maximum advantage. But standing in Katherine's apartment, with the aroma of sautéing onions and the sound of his daughter's voice calling him Dad, he realized that some situations couldn't be managed or controlled. They could only be navigated with honesty and perhaps something he'd rarely allowed himself: vulnerability. "I need to call you back," Richard told Marianne, his voice steady, despite the turmoil her news had unleashed. He returned to the kitchen, where Emily was proudly stirring the onions. "They're getting translucent, just like you said." "Perfect technique," Richard confirmed, forcing a smile. He caught Katherine's gaze over their daughter's head. "Katherine, could I speak with you privately for a moment?" She nodded, sensing the gravity in his tone. "Emily, keep stirring for another minute, then turn the heat down to low, okay?" "I know how to cook," Emily replied with mild indignation. "Grandma James taught me." Katherine led Richard to her small home office, closing the door behind them. "What's happened?" "A reporter from the Wall Street Journal has obtained internal board emails from 11 years ago," Richard said without preamble. "About you, about us, about how the board handled the situation." Katherine's expression didn't change, but he noticed her posture stiffen slightly. "I see." Katherine, those emails, they're cold, clinical. They discuss you as a problem to be solved, a potential liability to be mitigated. Richard ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of agitation. They make recommendations about your severance, about ensuring your silence, about distancing me from any personal entanglement that might distract from company performance. And did you write any of these emails? She asked quietly. Richard hesitated, then answered truthfully. No, but I was aware of them. I allowed the process to move forward. Katherine absorbed this, her face unreadable. So now the world will know that the great Richard Hawthorne allowed his board to excise me from his life for the good of the company. The story runs this weekend. She turned away, looking out the small window that faced another apartment building across a narrow courtyard. I always wondered exactly how it happened. The mechanics of it all. I knew the board was involved, of course, but I never knew the details. I should have told you. I should have stood up to them. Katherine turned back to him, a flash of anger breaking through her composed exterior. You should have, yes, but you didn't. You made your choice, Richard, and I made mine, to raise our daughter without bitterness, to build a life that didn't depend on your approval or support. From the kitchen came Emily's voice. Mom, Dad, the onions are done. What's next? The domestic normality of the question contrasted sharply with the tension in the office. What are you going to do about the story? Katherine asked. Richard considered. Throughout his career, he'd mastered the art of message control, of strategic information management. He could call in favors, pressure the newspaper's ownership, threaten legal action to delay publication. Nothing, he said finally. Katherine raised an eyebrow. Nothing. No spin, no pressure tactics, no legal maneuvers. Richard's decision crystallized as he spoke. I'm going to let the truth come out, all of it, and then I'm going to apologize, publicly, unequivocally, for choosing Vanguard over what could have been. Katherine studied him, searching for the calculation behind his words. That's not the Richard Hawthorne approach I remember. I'm not the same Richard Hawthorne, he said simply. At least I don't want to be. Before Katherine could respond, Emily appeared at the office door. Are we still making risotto? Because the onions are going to burn if we don't add the rice soon. We're coming, Katherine assured her. As Emily returned to the kitchen, Richard's phone rang again. Jacob Stein. With a sigh, he answered. I just heard from PR, Jacob said without greeting. The journal has our internal communications about Katherine Roberts from 11 years ago. Richard, this could be disastrous. The language in those emails is accurate, Richard interrupted. The board made a calculated decision to remove Katherine from my life for the good of the company. I allowed it to happen. It was a different time, Jacob protested. The company was preparing for the IPO. We couldn't afford any complications. She was pregnant with my child, Jacob, which none of us knew. Jacob's voice rose. Do you think any of us would have advocated for that course of action if we'd known about a baby? The question hung between them, unanswerable. I've instructed legal to demand the journal surrender their source, Jacob continued. We can argue these were privileged communications. We can buy some time. No, Richard said firmly. No legal action, no threats, no spin. Richard, be reasonable. I'm going to issue a personal statement accepting full responsibility for my choices 11 years ago. I'm going to apologize to Katherine and to Emily publicly, and then I'm going to ask the board to commission an independent review of our corporate culture and governance practices. Silence greeted his declaration. Have you lost your mind? Jacob finally asked. This could trigger a shareholder revolt. The stock will tank. Maybe, Richard acknowledged, or maybe shareholders will respect honesty and accountability. Either way, I'm not hiding from this. After ending the call, Richard returned to the kitchen, where Emily was explaining to Katherine why dicing vegetables in uniform sizes was mathematically optimal for even cooking. The scene of domestic normalcy, something he'd never prioritized or even particularly valued, suddenly seemed precious beyond measure. "Everything okay?" Katherine asked, noting his expression. "Not yet," Richard admitted. "But maybe it will be." They completed dinner preparation together, with Emily commanding the process with surprising authority for an 8-year-old. The risotto turned out beautifully, creamy, with perfectly al dente rice. As they sat down to eat, Emily launched into detailed questions about quantum computing, her curiosity boundless. Richard answered each one, occasionally exchanging glances with Katherine when Emily's understanding surpassed what should have been possible for her age. It was during dessert, store-bought gelato, that Emily insisted on serving with scientific precision, that Katherine's phone chimed with a news alert. She read it, her expression changing subtly, then handed the phone to Richard. "Breaking news. Vanguard Technologies stock falls 7% in after-hours trading as rumors circulate of damaging revelations about CEO Richard Hawthorne's past relationship with Columbia professor Katherine Roberts, mother of child who disrupted press conference earlier this week." "It's starting," Katherine said quietly. Richard nodded, handing the phone back. "I should go. I need to prepare my statement." Emily looked up from her gelato. "Are you in trouble because of me?" The directness of the question pierced through Richard's professional armor. "No, Emily. I'm in trouble because of choices I made long before you were born. None of this is your fault." "Are they going to fire you?" Richard considered how to answer, aware of Emily's perceptiveness. "I don't know. It's possible." "But you're rich, right? Like billions?" Despite everything, Richard smiled. "Yes. Financially, we'll be fine regardless of what happens." Emily nodded, processing this with her characteristic seriousness. "Good, because I still want that tour of the quantum lab, and it would be awkward if you weren't allowed in the building." As Richard prepared to leave, gathering his jacket, Emily unexpectedly hugged him. A quick, slightly awkward embrace that nonetheless left him momentarily speechless. "See you tomorrow?" she asked, an unusual hint of uncertainty in her voice. "Absolutely," Richard promised. "We still have risotto leftovers to finish." At the door, Katherine stopped him. "Richard, whatever happens with this story, don't disappear again. She's starting to trust you." "I won't," he said, and meant it more than any promise he'd ever made. "Whatever comes next, I'm her father first now." As he rode the elevator down to the street, Richard's phone buzzed constantly with messages from board members, executives, his PR team, all demanding direction, all seeking the strategic response that would minimize damage. For the first time in his career, Richard Hawthorne had no strategy beyond the truth. It was terrifying and somehow liberating. He had built an empire on calculated risk and controlled narratives. Now he was surrendering that control, stepping into an unknown future where the most important outcome wasn't stock price or market share, but the trust of an extraordinary little girl who had his eyes and a heart he was only beginning to understand. The Wall Street Journal headline was worse than Richard had anticipated. Hawthorne emails reveal systematic effort to separate CEO from pregnant researcher. The story had dropped online at 5 a.m., earlier than expected, and by 7 a.m., Richard's phone had essentially melted down with notifications. He sat in his penthouse office, dressed but tireless, watching financial networks dissect the scandal in real time. Vanguard's stock had plummeted 18% at the opening bell. Nearly $15 billion in market capitalization vanished in minutes. Emails describe Professor Roberts as a retention risk and potential liability, a CNBC commentator was saying. One board member suggested that Hawthorne's fixation on this researcher could jeopardize the entire IPO timeline, and recommended decisive action to redirect his focus to company priorities. Richard muted the television as his PR director, Susan Martinez, entered the room. "The statement is ready for your approval," she said, handing him a tablet. Richard scrolled through the carefully crafted text, a masterpiece of corporate communication that acknowledged the unfortunate language in the emails while emphasizing that no one at Vanguard, including Mr. Hawthorne, was aware of Professor Roberts' pregnancy at the time. "This isn't what I asked for," Richard said, handing the tablet back. Susan sighed. "Richard, with respect, this is the appropriate response. It expresses regret without admitting liability, places the emails in historical context, and redirects focus to your current commitment to your daughter." "It's spin," Richard replied simply. "And I told Jacob yesterday, no spin. I want a simple, direct statement acknowledging what happened and taking personal responsibility. The legal team strongly advises, I'm not interested in legal's advice on this. This isn't a legal matter. It's a moral one." The look Susan gave him was one he'd seen frequently over the past week, a mixture of confusion and concern, as if she were witnessing the real-time disintegration of the Richard Hawthorne she'd known for years. "Draft a new statement," he continued. "Make it straightforward. I was aware of the board's efforts to separate me from Katherine Roberts. I prioritized the company over our relationship. I didn't know she was pregnant, but that doesn't excuse my choices. I deeply regret the pain I caused her and the years I lost with my daughter. I'm committed to being a father to Emily now and to creating a more humane corporate culture at Vanguard." Susan made notes rapidly, her professional mask slipping just enough to reveal her discomfort. "And regarding the board members implicated in the emails, I take full responsibility for my own actions. I won't throw the board under the bus." "Richards," Susan said carefully, 3 of those board members are still serving. The emails show they actively conspired to separate you from Professor Roberts. One of them specifically mentioned that your relationship was an unnecessary distraction from the IPO preparations. "I was CEO then, as I am now," Richard replied. "The responsibility was mine." Before Susan could respond, Richard's personal phone rang. "Katherine." He excused Susan and answered. "I've seen the article," he said without preamble. "So was everyone at Columbia," Katherine replied, her voice tight. "My department chair just called an emergency meeting with the dean present." Richard closed his eyes briefly. "I'm sorry, Katherine. I never thought the emails would become public. They're asking if I used my relationship with you to secure my position at Columbia. They're reviewing my grant applications for potential conflicts of interest." Her voice remained controlled, but he could hear the underlying strain. "I've spent 9 years building my reputation here, Richard. 9 years of rigorous research, mentor awards, peer recognition, all potentially undermined because some board member wrote that you arranged a soft landing for me. What can I do?" Katherine was silent for a moment. Emily's school called. Some parents saw the story. They're concerned about media disruption. The shift in topic momentarily disoriented Richard. Media at her school. Photographers, reporters. They're already gathering at the main entrance. The principal wants us to keep her home today. Richard felt a surge of protective anger. "I'll send security. I can have a team there in 20 minutes. "That would only make it more of a spectacle." Katherine sighed. "I've already told Emily she's staying home. She's not happy about missing her science presentation." In the background, Richard could hear Emily's voice raised in protest. "I'll be there in an hour," he decided, "after I issue my statement." When he arrived at Katherine's building, Richard had to navigate past a small group of photographers and reporters who'd staked out the entrance. Inside the apartment, he found Emily at the dining table, surrounded by poster boards covered with diagrams of atom structures. "Dad!" she greeted him, momentarily forgetting her displeasure at missing school. "Did you know people are saying mean things about Mom on the internet? They're wrong. Mom is the smartest professor at Columbia. She published 14 papers in peer-reviewed journals." 15, Katherine corrected quietly from the kitchen. Richard set down his briefcase and coat. "I know how brilliant your mother is, Emily, and I'm going to make sure everyone else remembers that too." Emily studied him with that unnervingly perceptive gaze. "Are you in big trouble? Your company's stock dropped 18.7% this morning. That's approximately $15 billion in lost value." "You've been tracking the stock price?" Richard asked, surprised. "I set up a monitoring algorithm on Mom's computer," Emily said matter-of-factly. "It's simple code. I wanted to see the numerical impact of emotional decision-making on market behavior." Richard exchanged a look with Katherine, who shrugged as if to say, "This is what I've been dealing with for 9 years." "Yes, I'm in trouble," Richard admitted, sitting down beside Emily. "But it's the right kind of trouble. Sometimes fixing past mistakes is painful." Emily considered this, "like when you have to reset a broken bone so it can heal properly." "Exactly like that." Katherine joined them, setting down coffee for Richard and herself, juice for Emily. "I've been called to a meeting with the ethics committee at 2 p.m. They want to review my hiring process and grant applications." Richard's jaw tightened. "That's ridiculous. Your work stands on its own merit." "I know that. You know that. But the optics are problematic." Katherine's tone was clinically dispassionate, as if discussing an abstract case study rather than her own career. "I can release a statement clarifying that I had no involvement in your hiring at Columbia," Richard offered. "Actually," Katherine said, "you did have involvement, albeit indirectly. Your recommendation letter was part of my application package." Richard blinked in surprise. "You used my recommendation?" "It was an excellent letter, detailing my research contributions at Vanguard without any personal commentary. Professionally, it would have been foolish not to use it." Katherine sipped her coffee. "Though, in retrospect, perhaps I should have anticipated this exact scenario." Emily looked between them. "This is all very inefficient. Why don't you just tell everyone the truth?" Both adults turned to her. "The truth about what exactly?" Katherine asked. "About everything." Emily gestured as if the answer were obvious. "Dad's company made him choose work instead of us. He picked wrong. Now he knows it was wrong. He's trying to fix it. Mom had to do everything by herself, which was hard, but she succeeded anyway because she's exceptional. And now, I want both of you in my life without all this drama and stock market fluctuation." The simplicity of her assessment left both Richard and Katherine momentarily speechless. "From the mouths of babes," Katherine murmured finally. Richard studied his daughter with new appreciation. "You know what, Emily? You're absolutely right." He pulled out his phone and called Jacob Stein. "Richard, the board is in emergency session." Jacob answered immediately. "We need you here now." "I won't be coming in today," Richard replied, "but I am calling to inform you of my decision." "What decision?" Jacob's voice was wary. "I'm holding a press conference at 4 p.m., not a carefully managed statement through PR, an actual live press conference. I'm going to tell the complete truth about what happened 11 years ago, take full personal responsibility, and announce my plan for moving forward." "Richard, don't do anything rash." "This isn't rash, Jacob. For the first time in years, I'm thinking with complete clarity." Richard glanced at Emily, who was watching him intently. "I'd like the board's support, but I don't require it." After ending the call, Richard turned to Katherine. "Would you and Emily be willing to stand with me at this press conference?" Katherine's eyebrows rose. "You want to put our daughter in front of cameras again?" Not as a stunt or a shield, Richard clarified, but as a statement about what matters to me now. However, if you think it would be harmful to Emily, I want to go, Emily interjected firmly. I'm directly involved in this situation. I should have representation in its resolution. Katherine sighed. You've been spending too much time with your father. You're starting to sound like a corporate attorney. Despite everything, they all smiled. If we do this, Katherine said slowly, we do it as equals. No narrative about the brilliant CEO magnanimously acknowledging his former researcher and their child. We tell the complete story, including how I built my career and raised Emily without your input or assistance for 9 years. Absolutely, Richard agreed immediately. Katherine studied him, still searching for the calculating businessman she'd known. And after this press conference, when the media circus eventually moves on, what then, Richard? It was the question that had been lurking beneath the surface of every interaction since Emily had crashed his press conference. What did a future look like with Richard Hawthorne as a father? What was he truly committing to? Looking at his daughter's expectant face, Richard found his answer with surprising ease. For once, the path forward wasn't about strategic advantage or reputation management. It was about something both simpler and infinitely more complex: love, responsibility, and the chance to be part of something more meaningful than stock prices or market share. The press conference had been unlike anything in Vanguard's corporate history. Held in the company's main auditorium rather than a hotel ballroom, it featured not the usual backdrop of corporate logos and sleek visuals, but instead a simple podium with 3 microphones adjusted to different heights. Richard had spoken first, without notes or teleprompter, his usual polished delivery replaced by something more authentic and unguarded. 11 years ago, I was presented with a choice between my company and a relationship with an extraordinary woman, he had begun. I chose wrongly. I allowed corporate priorities to override personal ones. I permitted a process that systematically removed Katherine Roberts from my life for the sake of Vanguard's IPO timeline and public image. He had continued with unflinching honesty, acknowledging his complicity in the board's actions without shifting blame, expressing genuine regret, not for the public relations disaster, but for the human cost of his decisions. Katherine had spoken next, her academic precision bringing clarity to her part of the story. Her pregnancy discovered after the separation, her decision to build her career and raise Emily independently, her success in establishing herself as a respected researcher despite the challenges of single parenthood. And finally, to everyone's surprise, Emily had stepped up to the lowest microphone. "I'm Emily Roberts," she had said with remarkable poise for an 8-year-old. "I crashed my dad's press conference because I was tired of waiting for grown-ups to figure things out. Sometimes kids have to take matters into their own hands." Her unexpected humor had rippled through the press room, breaking the tension. The subsequent questions had been probing, but not hostile, and by the end, even the most cynical reporters seemed moved by the family's candor. That had been 2 weeks ago. Now, Richard sat in Katherine's living room, surrounded by moving boxes. Across from him, Emily was methodically labeling each box with detailed content lists. "You don't need to catalog everything," Richard said, amused by her precision. "The movers know to be careful with all the boxes." "Organization is efficiency," Emily replied without looking up from her labeling. "Mom taught me that." Katherine emerged from her bedroom with another box. "She's not wrong. Academic life requires rigorous organization." Richard watched them, still adjusting to the new reality they were creating together. The press conference had indeed reset the narrative, though not without consequences. Vanguard stock had initially plummeted further, triggering 2 days of panic among investors. But then, something unexpected had happened. Public sentiment had begun to shift. Richard's honesty, His willingness to prioritize his daughter over corporate image had resonated with a public increasingly cynical about business leaders. Katherine's evident accomplishments had undercut any narrative that might have cast her as an opportunist, and Emily had simply charmed everyone. By the following week, Vanguard's stock had begun to recover. The board, initially furious, had been forced to acknowledge that Richard's approach had ultimately minimized long-term damage. Even Jacob Stein had grudgingly conceded that the transparency strategy had worked better than their planned damage control. "Are you sure about this move?" Richard asked Katherine, not for the first time. "Columbia has offered you that expanded lab and research team." Katherine set down her box. "The joint research initiative between Columbia and Vanguard makes more sense for my work, and the NYU teaching position gives me more flexibility." She glanced at Emily. "Besides, the new apartment is closer to Emily's new school." The mention of school made Emily look up. "Dad, when can I see the quantum lab again? You promised we could run my entanglement experiment." "Next week," Richard promised, "after you're settled in your new school." The changes had come rapidly after the press conference. Katherine had been fully cleared by Columbia's ethics committee, but the media attention had disrupted her work. When Richard had proposed a joint research initiative between Vanguard and Columbia, focusing on quantum biological interfaces, with Katherine as the lead researcher, both institutions had seen the potential. The arrangement gave Katherine access to Vanguard's quantum computing resources while maintaining her academic independence through a concurrent appointment at NYU. The move to an apartment equidistant between Vanguard headquarters and NYU had been the logical next step. Richard had offered to help find and furnish the new place, careful to respect Katherine's independence while supporting the transition. Their personal relationship remained complicated. Too much history, too many years apart, too much caution on Katherine's part. But they had established a functioning co-parenting relationship that put Emily's needs first. "The school called again," Katherine mentioned, sealing a box of books. "They want to confirm you'll be attending the parent orientation on Thursday." "I'll be there," Richard said. "I've already cleared my schedule." Katherine gave him an appraising look. "That's the third time this month you've rearranged board meetings for Emily's activities, and it won't be the last." Richard shrugged. "The board is adjusting to the new reality." The new reality included significant changes at Vanguard. Following the press conference, Richard had announced several initiatives: expanded parental leave, flexible work arrangements for caregivers, and a comprehensive review of the company's governance and culture. He had also restructured his own role, delegating day-to-day operations to allow more time for strategic direction and for his family. Emily finished labeling a box and approached Richard with her tablet. "I've been researching the quantum biology lab concepts. I have some ideas for improvements to Mom's protein folding models." Richard reviewed her notes, impressed despite himself. "These are actually quite insightful. Have you shown these to your mother?" "She says I need to finish elementary school before I can co-author papers with her," Emily replied, with a hint of frustration. "A reasonable boundary," Richard agreed, fighting a smile. "But unreasonable limitations stifle innovation," Emily countered, clearly repeating an argument she'd already made to Katherine. "Innovation also requires foundation," Katherine called from across the room, evidently familiar with this debate. The doorbell rang, announcing the arrival of the movers. As Katherine went to answer, Richard found himself momentarily overwhelmed by the scene, the boxes representing their future, Emily's serious expression as she organized her books, the comfortable domestic chaos so different from his previously ordered existence. For a man who had built his reputation on predicting technological trends, Richard found himself in entirely uncharted territory. He had no algorithm for fatherhood, No strategic plan for building a family relationship from scratch. No data points to guide his decisions about balancing work and parenting. And yet, for the first time in his life, the uncertainty didn't trouble him. Each day with Emily brought new discoveries, new challenges, new moments of connection that no business success could rival. He was learning to value metrics he'd never previously considered: his daughter's laughter, her trust, her emerging confidence in his presence in her life. As the movers began carrying boxes, Emily slipped her small hand into Richard's, a gesture still new enough to catch him by surprise. "Dad," she said, her expression serious, "I calculated that you've missed approximately 3,287 days of my life." Richard felt a pang of regret. "That sounds about right." "That's 78,188 hours, Emily continued, "which is a lot." "Yes, it is," Richard agreed, wondering where this was going. "But if you spend just 2 hours with me every day for the next 10 years, you'll have accumulated 7,300 hours. Emily's fingers tightened around his. "That's not equal, but it's a statistically significant sample size for establishing a father-daughter relationship. Do you think you can commit to that?" Richard knelt down to meet her eyes, recognizing in her calculation the same need for certainty, for quantifiable commitment that he himself had always sought in business relationships. "Emily," he said softly, "I'm committed to far more than 2 hours a day. I'm committed to being your father for all the hours, all the days, all the years ahead of us. I can't get back the time we lost, but I promise you'll never have to calculate our time together again. It will simply be a given, like gravity or the speed of light, a constant you can rely on." Emily studied him with that penetrating gaze that seemed to evaluate the truth of his words at a molecular level. Then, apparently satisfied, she nodded once, decisively. "Acceptable terms," she said, and hugged him. 6 months later, Richard stood at the back of a packed auditorium at the Manhattan Science Academy for gifted children, trying to remain inconspicuous despite being recognizable to most of the parents. At the front of the room, Emily was presenting her science project, a surprisingly sophisticated model of protein folding algorithms optimized for quantum computing. By applying quantum superposition principles to protein configuration mapping, she explained to the judges with impressive confidence, we can dramatically reduce the computational time required to model complex biological structures. Richard caught Katherine's eye across the room, and they shared a smile of pride tinged with amusement. Emily had insisted on completing the project entirely on her own, though she grudgingly allowed Katherine to review her methodology and Richard to help with the visual display. When the judges awarded Emily first place, her face lit up with a joy that Richard had come to treasure above all his professional accomplishments. As the crowd dispersed after the ceremony, he made his way to the front, where Emily was carefully packing her presentation materials. "Congratulations, quantum pioneer," he said, helping her disassemble the display board. "The judges didn't fully understand the mathematical model," Emily replied critically, "but they recognized the potential applications." "That's because you explained them so clearly," Katherine said, joining them. "Your presentation skills have improved tremendously." "Dad's been helping me practice," Emily said. "He says clear communication is as important as the innovation itself." Richard felt a warmth bloom in his chest at this casual acknowledgement of their shared time. Over the past 6 months, such moments had become increasingly common, evidence of his growing place in Emily's life, proof that their relationship was real and developing, not just a novelty or obligation. As they left the school, Emily walking between them, Richard reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The press conference had indeed marked a turning point, not just in public perception, but in his own priorities. Vanguard had ultimately thrived under the new leadership structure. The quantum computing breakthrough had overshadowed the personal drama in the business world, and Richard's transparency during the crisis had surprisingly enhanced his reputation as a leader. The joint research initiative with Katherine's team was already yielding promising results, attracting attention from both scientific and investment communities. But the real changes had been personal. Richard had discovered capacities within himself he hadn't known existed. Patience when helping Emily with projects that required multiple attempts, humility when faced with Katherine's superior knowledge in certain scientific domains, joy in simple family activities he'd previously considered wastes of productive time. "Ice cream to celebrate?" he suggested, as they reached the sidewalk. "It's a school night," Katherine reminded him. "A small, celebratory serving wouldn't significantly impact sleep quality," Emily argued, with the precision that always made Richard smile. Katherine rolled her eyes but conceded. "One scoop." As they walked toward their favorite ice cream shop, Emily between them, occasionally taking each of their hands when crossing streets, Richard thought about the press coverage that had followed their story. After the initial frenzy, interest had gradually waned, but last month, Forbes had published a profile titled "The Billion-Dollar Lesson: How Fatherhood Changed Richard Hawthorne." The article had characterized his journey as a redemption narrative, contrasting the calculating businessman of the past with the more balanced leader and father he was becoming. Richard had found the simplification amusing, as if his transformation had been sudden and complete, rather than the ongoing, sometimes awkward, always challenging process it actually was. The reality was both more mundane and more profound. He still worked long hours. He still missed occasional school events due to unavoidable business commitments. He and Katherine still navigated their co-parenting relationship carefully, their past complicated by present circumstances. But he had established constants in this new universe. Sunday mornings were sacrosanct family time, regardless of business emergencies. Wednesday afternoons were reserved for father-daughter visits to museums, libraries, or the Vanguard labs. Daily video calls when travel was absolutely necessary. Small routines and rituals that Emily could rely upon. "Dad," Emily said as they waited for their ice cream, "I calculated that in the past 6 months, you've spent approximately 648 hours with me." That sounds right," Richard agreed, having grown accustomed to his daughter's penchant for tracking data. "How does that compare to your projections?" "You've exceeded expected values by 23.6%, Emily replied with satisfaction. "Statistical analysis suggests a positive trend line for future engagement." Katherine laughed softly. "Only our daughter would quantify family bonding." "I'm genetically predisposed to data analysis," Emily said seriously. "It's not my fault." Richard smiled, recognizing his own tendency toward measurement reflected back at him. "Some things are beyond quantification, though." Emily considered this with her characteristic thoughtfulness. "Like what?" "Like how proud I am of you today," Richard said. "Or how grateful I am to have you in my life." Emily accepted her ice cream cone, pondering his words. Actually, pride and gratitude could theoretically be measured through neurochemical analysis or self-reported subjective scales. "They're ever the scientist," Katherine said, amused. But Emily continued licking her ice cream. "I understand the sentiment. Some experiences exceed our current measurement capabilities, like family." As they sat outside the ice cream shop, Richard found himself in a moment of perfect clarity, the kind that had previously come to him only during breakthrough business innovations or strategic insights. But this was different. This wasn't about market advantage or competitive positioning. This was about the realization that he, Katherine, and Emily had created something unique and precious, not a traditional family perhaps, but their own configuration, built on truth, respect, and growing love. Later that evening, after they'd dropped Emily at her chess club, another activity she approached with characteristic intensity, Richard and Katherine walked back toward their respective apartments, which were in the same neighborhood, but separate. A boundary Katherine maintained even as they collaborated professionally and parentally. "She's thriving," Katherine observed. "Her teachers say she's more socially engaged than ever before, more confident." "That's your influence," Richard said. "You've given her extraordinary stability and support." Katherine shrugged off the compliment, but looked pleased. "Having you consistently in her life has made a difference. She trusts that you're staying this time." The simple observation carried the weight of their complicated history. "I am," Richard affirmed. "Whatever else changes, that won't." They walked in comfortable silence for a block, before Katherine spoke again. "The Quantum Biology Initiative is gaining traction. Cambridge has expressed interest in collaboration." "I saw the proposal," Richard replied. "It's impressive. The board approved the additional funding yesterday." "On academic merit alone?" Katherine asked, a hint of their old tension surfacing. "Jacob insisted on having 3 independent reviewers confirm its potential," Richard said with a slight smile. "They were unanimous." Katherine nodded, satisfied. They had both worked hard to establish professional boundaries that respected her autonomy while leveraging Vanguard's resources. As they reached the corner where their paths would diverge, Katherine hesitated. "Emily's birthday is next month. She's been hinting about a weekend trip to the Kennedy Space Center." "I'll clear my calendar," Richard said immediately. "I was thinking," Katherine continued, with uncharacteristic uncertainty, "it might be nice to go together. As a family trip. The 3 of us." Richard felt the significance of the invitation, the first time Katherine had suggested something that extended beyond their carefully structured co-parenting arrangements. "I'd like that," he said simply. Katherine nodded, her expression softening. "Good. Emily will be thrilled." She turned to go, then added, "You've changed, Richard." "Not enough," he acknowledged, "but I'm working on it." "It's a process," Katherine agreed. "For all of us." Say. As Richard walked the remaining blocks to his apartment, he reflected on the journey that had begun with a small girl crashing his press conference. The headline that day, "Little Girl Crashes Billionaire'S Press Conference, I'm Your Biggest Investment," had proven prophetic in ways no financial analyst could have predicted. Emily was indeed his biggest investment now, but not in the way the business world measured value. She represented his investment in becoming someone different than the man he had been. Someone capable of putting relationships before business, love before strategy, family before empire. It was the most profitable investment he had ever made. I've reached the end of this story, but I want it to continue through you. If this narrative touched your heart or made you reflect on your own choices, become part of our storytelling community. Tap the subscribe button. This small gesture means so much to me. Share in the comments which moment of this journey resonated most with you, and if you've ever experienced something similar in your own life. Your stories are the true treasure of this channel, and that's why we continue here week after week, sharing these narratives that remind us of what really matters. Until the next story, which I promise will be as special as you, who has stayed with me until the end.